right. Well, it's great to be back together again. If you're new here, we often, usually, most weeks, we take our teaching portion of the service and we group our messages together in what we call a series under some common theme that usually makes some larger point. But every once in a while, we stop and spend 1 week to talk about one thing, and this is one of those weeks. It's kind of been set up nicely because of the schedule, and so we're taking a week to talk about something a little different. But before I tell you what we're talking about, I'll tell you a little story, all right, or I'll share a little experience, and maybe you can relate to this experience. So my wife, Allie, she grew up in Virginia. Her whole life she was down there, so she's from the South. I grew up here on Long Island, and so I figured, hey, we're from the same country. We probably have pretty similar lives. But when we started dating, I realized that is not the case. We do things very, very differently in the North, especially Long Island. We've got some things. And then in the South, things are a little bit different. And I didn't realize these things because it was just part of my life. But while we were dating, she would let me know, oh yeah, like that's a thing. This is one of those things. That's one of those things. And it was amazing for me to realize all of these things. So one of them was like, yeah, you know, holidays at your house, she's explaining this to me, holidays like Thanksgiving, it's just, you guys are just at the table the whole time. And so you better get a good seat because you're going to be there the whole time. And you're at the table and you tell stories. And you know what? You tell the same stories every single year. And everyone laughs like they've never heard the stories before. Like it's fresh news. And I was like, I don't think we do that, you know. And then the next Thanksgiving, I'm like, oh yeah, we do. We tell these stories over and over again. My brother-in-law, who's also an outsider coming in, he looked at Allie. He's like, yes, they tell the same stories. We know how it's going to end, but everyone's surprised. And she's like, you know, another thing, you know who gets to talk in your family? You know who gets to talk? The loudest person. That's who gets to talk. So if you start telling a story, but you're not really owning it, and someone decides they're more passionate about this story and they come in louder, they get everyone's attention and they get to tell the rest of the story. And so you got to be loud and you got to stay loud until the story ends. And I'm like, man, you know, I didn't realize these were things, but they were things. I didn't realize they were things until she told me they were things. And then I started looking for things, right? And realized there were some other things as well. Like maybe you can relate to this. When you, in my family, if you get invited somewhere, you say, okay, yeah, sure. And then you ask a question. You say, what can we bring? And then you got to do this back and forth dance for a little while. What can we bring? Nothing. Are you kidding me? Just come. No, really. And when I'm explaining this to Allie, I'm like, you got to fight through that. They're going to say, just bring your kids, just bring your family. You push through. What are we going to bring? You know what? Fine. You want to bring something? Just bring a Friendly's watermelon roll. Okay, got it. You know, and then so you bring something. But it's a thing, you know. Shoes in the house, another thing. When I was growing up, you walk into someone's house, I was raised, you take your shoes off. And often I'd take off my shoes and I'd go, and then someone would come over, you know, like my mom or my aunt or somebody, like, oh, don't take off your shoes. The house is a mess and it's spotless. And, you know, no, don't. And you're like, no, I insist. You take off your shoes because you just do that. And it's a thing. It was not a thing in Allie's family. Like everyone wears their shoes in the house over there. And I remember the first time I went to her grandmother's house, I walked in, I started taking off my shoes, and they were like, don't take off your shoes. And I was like, no, I got it. And I took them off, and I walked into the living room, and I'm the only one in socks. But it's a thing. If you're on the outside of an inside operation, you realize that there are things that you're not used to. Right? And if you're on the inside of the inside operation, you may not know that there are some things because you're just used to it. It's just part of being on the inside. And that applies to family situations, it applies to cultures, but it also applies to church. And I remember feeling this way not too long ago. We had an event here. We called it Sunday dinner. It was right in this room and downstairs where we had a dinner. And then after we ate, in between the food and the dessert, we had a portable baptismal, a little, looked like a pop-up hot tub over there in the corner. And we're like, oh, today we're celebrating baptism. And Tom goes in there and, you know, he takes this lady and plunges her underwater and brings her back up. And we cheer. And it's like, yes, because we celebrate that. That's a big deal to us around here. But I remember afterwards feeling in a similar way that I felt when Allie had approached me about things. someone came up to me who had been coming to the church for a few months, and she's like, was unfamiliar with church up to this point. She's like, everything you guys do, it makes sense. You explain everything. I understand. It's wonderful. But she's like, what the heck was that? Why did he just plunge her underwater? Can you explain that? And it helped me realize, that's a thing. And so today, especially because of the little shift in calendar, we decided to take a week to talk about this thing and another thing that often we can just breeze over and assume that everybody knows. We're talking about baptism. Now, let me just say, maybe you're not typically in church and you decided I'm going to give church a shot today, and then you show up here and you're like, oh, great, it's church people talking about one of those church things. I wake up this morning and think about what's the deal with baptism, right? But I think this is actually a great week for you to be here, because baptism for us is something that we celebrate big time. I think it is one of the most meaningful, one of the most exciting, and even one of the most practical things that we do around here. But you have to know why we do it. Now, let me just say a little disclaimer. Let me throw this out here. If you come from a church tradition that does baptism in a way that's different from us, that's okay with us here. Baptism is an exciting thing. We celebrate it, but for us, it's a secondary issue. And so if you don't believe what we believe about baptism, we're totally cool with that as long as you are. But here's what we believe, all right? So baptism, what's the deal with it? Well, if you go back to the source, one day, Jesus, after he died and came back, this is after Easter Sunday, he's risen from the dead, he gathers his crew, he actually tells them to meet him at one of their favorite gathering spots on a mountain, which is really more like a hill, but he gets them together, and it says, here's what happens. This is recorded by Matthew. He says, Matthew writes, then the 11 disciples, the disciples were Jesus' closest followers. They're originally 12, but one of them didn't make it. They went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go, okay? So they get to this place. They had been there before. It says, when they saw him, get this, all right? This is not what we're talking about today, but it's helpful. When they saw him, they worshiped him, and Matthew writes, but some doubted, all right? If you've got doubts and you feel alone, don't feel alone. You're in good company. They're right in front of Jesus, who just died and came back, and they're like, we're still not sure. Some doubted. I appreciate that. Thanks, Matthew. He goes on, he says, Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. In other words, my words carry weight. And in case you weren't sure, I said I was going to die and come back 3 days later, and I just did. And so if you can do that and pull it off, your words have authority. He goes on, he says, so therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. He's talking to his disciples, and he's saying, make disciples, invite people in. Not just from Israel, but from all nations. And then he says this, he says, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey, to listen to everything I've commanded you. And then he gives them a promise, and he says, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. And so this is what he says. These are his commands. These are his final orders. He's about to start this movement. Actually, he's about to leave and hand over the entire operation to these 11 guys, some of whom are doubting. And he's like, here's what you do. And he gives us 4 verbs. 4 verbs. Ready? Go, make disciples, baptize, and teach. Right? 4 of them. Now, okay, this kind of makes sense to me. Go, right? You gotta that's action. Go, make disciples. Okay, he's saying invite people in. The word disciple means student or follower. He's like, invite people to be my followers. Baptize and teach them. Okay, teaching makes sense. If you're gonna invite someone to follow Jesus, it makes sense. You're gonna tell them what he said, right? But the baptizing, I don't know. If you're like me, I'm like, still, why? What is the point of that? Why is that a thing? And why does that make it into this short list of, here you go, guys, and then he leaves? what's the deal with baptism? So let's shift gears for a second. Think about this, all right? If I were to ask you what you did yesterday, what would you think about? Right? Yesterday, I did some things to chop down a branch off a tree. It was a project. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But when I think about it, I remember little snapshots, right? If I try to think about my day, I can remember, all right, in the morning, I can remember eating, remember grabbing a box of cereal. But I remember it's like little clicks, like this moment, that moment, that moment, right? They're little glimpses of time. It's not like I remember my day like I press play and I watch it all super fast and I remember. I remember moments. I remember moments. There's a whole field of study about this, about really the power of moments. I've mentioned this before. There's a book by two guys named Chip and Dan Heath. It's called The Power of Moments. And the idea is that our minds, this is how we're wired. We remember little snapshots. Now, with these moments, there are some that carry way more weight than other moments. They're moments of disproportionate influence. They're moments that we use to better understand ourselves and better understand our stories, like the stories that we're living. They're little blips on a timeline, and if you're looking back over who you are and how you understand yourself, you probably point to different moments along this timeline. So one of these moments is like high school graduation. If you graduated from high school, you probably remember the moment you received your diploma, right? There's a big ceremony. It's a thing. It's an event. It's a little blip that tells a story of your entire educational experience. In that receiving of the diploma is representing the work that you've done, the knowledge that you've gained, the person you're becoming, and it's represented in that moment. These moments, they become symbols that tell a story, or that remind us of that story. It would be very different if, imagine your senior year of high school, at some point in March, halfway through one of the class periods, your teacher was just like, all right, I guess that's the end of the textbook, so see ya, you're done with school, and walked out. You'd be like where's the symbolic moment that symbolizes that this is over, right? A marriage, a wedding is the same thing. We do the same thing. We go through a ceremony, we create a moment that tells a story. It tells the story of two people's devotion for one another, but also the commitment to the future. And it's all tied up in that one moment. And if you look at the timeline of your life, you'll see moments like this that you use to understand yourself. Kids, like young kids, these moments for them are often birthdays. They remember their birthday. Imagine not knowing how old you are and never celebrating a birthday. Age would be so hard to grasp, the concept of how old you are. But we have these moments that signify, okay, now I'm this years old, now I'm this years old, and kids know. Now I'm 12. I just had my 12th birthday. And you ever, like a little kid, you ever wonder how much or notice how much it throws them off when their birthday party is not on the day of their birthday? They're like, whoa, because that it means so much to them. It's how they understand themselves. Now I'm 5, right? They're defining moments that symbolize so much. And when we don't have these moments that wrap up an entire experience, something feels off, right? That was one of the most difficult things about COVID. There were all these students that finished school, and it was like they couldn't walk. Why? Is it because they really wanted to hear their commencement speaker, or really wanted to be in a hot auditorium wearing a gown? No, it's because it's important, those moments. right? If you planned to have a wedding ceremony and you couldn't do it, it felt like there's something that was missing. If you couldn't have birthday parties, it's like I couldn't express that moment. We look for them, and when we're not given them, we look for ways to create them, right? Like when you can't have a birthday party, what do? You're like, oh, let's all just drive by their house and blast our car horns, right? It's to create a moment, because these moments serve as symbols on our timeline that mark stories, the story. And it's how we use them to help us understand ourselves. So when Jesus shows up, like picture this. He shows up to a world that was surprisingly like ours. There were people, some who were just burnt out, like tired of religious life, of all the to-dos and the to-don'ts, who were totally unfulfilled and exhausted. There were people who were worried about tomorrow, worried about the government. For them, it was the Roman Empire. Worried what was going to happen to the comfort of their world that they had come to know. There were people that were longing for change. There were people that were wrestling with life's unexpected curveballs. People trying to find healing from tragic circumstances. And Jesus shows up, and he starts making these wild claims. Not that he had the answer to all these things, but that he was the answer. He described it in a number of different ways at a number of different times. He said, like, if that feeling within you, that longing, if you want to call it hunger, I'm the bread to that hunger. If you want to call it thirst, I am the water to that thirst. If you want to call it a sense of internal darkness, I am the light to that darkness. If it feels like your soul is weary, I am the rest for your soul. And he invited people to follow him. He said he had come to bring life, to give life to the full. Not to give people another list of rules, not to start a religion, but to offer life to the full. And so then he was like, come and see. Like, come follow me. And some people did. And for them, they had a concrete way to represent that abstract decision. You know, like for Peter, he's working with fishing nets, and he puts them down. He's like, all right, I'm going to follow him. And that was a way they could express that, in an outward way, they could express that internal decision. And you know, because they wrote about it, you know they remembered those moments. Yeah, that was the moment when I dropped it and I followed him. That was the moment I said, I'm with him. That was the moment I joined in and started to experience the things that he was talking about. That was the moment when my life changed direction. But for us, things are a little different, right? Like, they knew they were following Jesus because they looked over and there he was. And they weren't where they used to be. For us, it's not so clear. And so what we see actually all throughout the story of the Bible is God giving people tangible ways to express intangible things. Like, there were points in the Old Testament where he would say, stop right here, build an altar, and look at what's going on. And they would stop. And that thing became the thing on their timeline and in their area that reminded them of what God had done. And so for us, we're given a way, an outward way to express that internal decision. We believe this is baptism. Baptism is a symbol that tells a story, a twofold story. It tells the story of Jesus, right? Maybe you've heard people say in baptism, they'll say buried with Christ in baptism and raised to walk in the newness of life. Like, it represents what he's done for us, right? But it also tells the story of your decision. Like, I'm with him for other people watching, but also for you. Like, that was the moment where I said, okay, I'm in. Like, he's the guy. for me. You know, if you put that verse back up here again, if you look at what he says, remember I said there were 4 verbs? There's go, make disciples, baptize, and teach. In the original language, there's actually really only one verb. The other verbs are participial phrases, meaning they're supporting the main verb. The main verb is make disciples. He's telling his followers, let other people into this. Show them this way of life. The go here, it's the idea of while you're going, while you're living your life, invite people in. Show them that there's something to this. That this is what life to the full looks like, and make disciples. And how do you do that? By baptizing them and teaching them. In other words, the baptism is the starting point. It's the first yes to following Jesus. It's a ceremonial picture of like, all right, I'm in. And so you look back and remember, when was the point where I was like, I'm starting that journey? It's at that point. That's why he gave us baptism. He could have just said, go out there and teach people from every nation. But he's talking about becoming his follower. Like, it's a new way to understand yourself. You're not 11 anymore, you're 12. Right? It's who we are. He's like, go make disciples. And so what that means is that Jesus he's not a guy that like you listen to who has some good things to say. To be a disciple was to have a rabbi. And we don't have that arrangement in our culture, but in essence to us, what it's saying is like, he is not a guy, he is the guy. Like, I like to listen to podcasts. There's a guy, his name's Andrew Huberman. He talks about the brain in a way that people who don't understand the brain can understand. So I appreciate him because I'm not a brain guy. But I like to listen to him. For me, he's a guy. There's some other people that are guys. They're like a guy or a girl who's got some good things to say. And they take some stuff and I leave it. But then there's like, for me, then there's Jesus. He's the guy. Like at the end of the day, when I want to know and I don't know, or I need some direction, or I need to make a hard decision, he's the guy. When I want to know how to deal with conflict in my life, he's the guy that I go to, because that's what it means to be a disciple, to make Jesus the guy. Not just a voice, but the ultimate voice. And so he's saying, like, there's a starting point. You baptize them, and that's the moment. And then you teach them all along the way, and it's a process. It's a process. And so we celebrate that. That's a big, big deal to us because of everything that it means for that person's future. I'll give you a few frequently asked questions. Now, in case you weren't here in the beginning of the service, we're doing a baptism service today. And if you want to be baptized, you can do that. I even threw the QR code right here in the corner so that if you want to scan it, you can right now. If you don't want to fill out a form and you want to get baptized, you don't have to scan that. You can still show up, but you won't get a t-shirt. So if you want a t-shirt, you got to scan the code. Frequently asked questions, okay? Question 1. Am I ready to be baptized? This is a question we get frequently. The answer to that question is very simple. Do you believe that Jesus is who he said he is, and that he did what he said he would do? He gave everything for us in this act of amazing love and radical grace. Like, do you believe that? And is he your guy? If you can say yes to that question, then you can be baptized. Like, sometimes in the church world, we put baptism as like step 2. We're like, okay, well, yes, I believe, but I'm not quite ready to be baptized because, I still got this problem, or there's still this one thing I'm struggling to get over, or there's, I don't know about this thing. Like, here's how we say it. Baptism is not, we're not celebrating the progress you've made. We're celebrating the direction that you're headed. Right? So we're cheering, not because we're like, yes, he finally got it together, No, it's like, okay, from this point, I'm beginning a journey following Jesus. And you know what that journey is going to look like? It's going to look like a step forward and then like 2 steps back, maybe then like 3 more, but then another step forward and another step forward, and it's going to be ups and downs, lefts and rights, like wins and losses, but it is endless second chances and radical grace and what Jesus called life to the full. Like, in other words, there will be a point where you look back and you're like, there is is no better way to live than this way. And it starts by taking one step. And so we celebrate that. We cheer, not because they've got it together, but because of what this is going to mean for your future relationships, for the problems in your life, for the people in your circles that you're doing life with, for your kids, for your spouse, for your boyfriend, your girlfriend, like because of all the good that is promised after this decision. And yes, there are going to be issues. You're going to take some steps backwards, but it is a journey of endless second chances. And so the question is, am I ready to be baptized? If you believe that, then yes, you are. Does baptism give me a fresh start? We believe no. Jesus gives you a fresh start. And baptism is an outward expression of that inward change. In other words, we don't believe that there is something that happens within you just because you went under the water. We are celebrating what's happened within you by putting you under the water, right? You're not 12 because you had a birthday. You had a birthday because you're 12. It's not about the symbol, it's about the story that the symbol tells. And so baptism is a celebration of that expression. Last question. This is a question we actually get frequently. Okay, ready? Can I get baptized again? We call that being double dipped. For us, the answer to that question is, and you may have a different view here, the answer to that question is, it depends. I love when my parents used to say that when I would ask them a question. It depends. If you didn't understand what you were doing when you were getting baptized, for us, we believe you can be baptized again. If you weren't old enough to understand, like in the tradition I grew up in, I was baptized as a baby and I didn't understand it. And so I got a little older, my beliefs changed a little bit, and then I got baptized again because it was a choice I was making. And so if you did not understand, maybe because you were young, maybe you were older, but it was at the end of a class and they said, now you get baptized, and you still didn't get it, but you did it, then we would say, yes, you can. However, if you want to be baptized because there was a point where you understood it, but then you went off track, and now you want to be renewed or reminded of God's goodness and grace, and you want that fresh start, we would say, no, you can't get baptized again. And it's a hard thing to say, right? Because we want to celebrate that with you. But to baptize you again would actually be communicating the opposite message that baptism sends the first time. That this is going to be a journey of ups and downs and steps forward and steps back. And so, yeah, maybe you're coming out of a few steps back and we're excited and cheering you on because you're taking steps forward now. But to baptize you again would contradict the message of endless second chances. This is a start of a journey that we knew was going to be rough at times if you're a human being. But the beauty of it is that you can't wear out God's grace. We're told his mercy is new every morning, and he's in your corner whether you're getting it right or not. And so to say you got to do it again, like if we believe that, we'd have to do it again a little while after that, because you're probably going to have some issues again later on, right? It would be like saying every time you got into a serious marriage argument, you had to get married again. It's like, no. I told you I was committed to you for better or for worse. And this is the for worse part. But that does not change my commitment to you. Now that said, I'm going to shift gears real quick. I told you, if you want to, if you're in a place where you want to remind yourself of God's goodness, be brought back to that place of clean slate, or I should say, be reminded of your clean slate, not earning a clean slate, but be reminded of it. Well, then what if I can't get baptized again? What's great is it's almost like Jesus knew we were going to run into this, we were going to want tangible ways to express intangible things. And he gave that to us. And the Apostle Paul explains that symbol as well. He's explaining what Jesus said to his followers on that last night, and he said, in the same way, after supper, he took a cup and said, this was at the Last Supper. He takes a cup, and he says, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. It's a new arrangement with God. And he says, when you do this whenever you drink of it. Why? In remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread, and this is Paul speaking now, he says, whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the death of the Lord until he comes. In other words, when we do this, we're being reminded of the story. We're being reminded of the goodness of God, his amazing grace of endless second chances. We bring ourselves back to that place in a tangible way, and we can eat it and drink it and get our heads right and be reminded of the goodness of God. And Jesus is like, I'm giving you a chance to do this often because you're going to need it. You're going to need to be brought back to that place. In other words, we would say baptism is a symbol that tells a story, but we've got another one. We call it communion. It's a symbol that tells a story, that proclaims the story of Jesus and his radical, inexhaustible love for you. And so in the time we have left, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. And there's no pressure. If you're not comfortable taking communion, you don't have to. Some of our hosts are going to pass out some these little super convenient communion cups. I'm going to ask you to hold on to them. We can pass them out now. I'm going to ask you to hold on to them, and then we'll take it together. But this is a moment for us to remember, not to get a clean slate, but to be reminded that God is in your corner. Whether you feel like you're getting it right or feel like you're getting it all wrong. So that night, Jesus sat with his 12 disciples, with Judas, the one who would betray him, with Peter, the one who would deny him, and with those others who some, even after all of this happened, some still doubted. And he sat there, he took bread, which at that time represented something in the history of ancient Israel. But he redefined it, he gave it a new meaning, and he broke it. And he said, this is my body, which is going to be broken for you. Like, this is how far I'll go to show you that I love you. This is what amazing love and inexhaustible grace, endless second chances, this is what it looks like, and this is how far I'm willing to go to give that to you. So he said, so you come together and you do this to remember me, to remember that. And so let's do this together. And in the same way, he took a cup and he gave it a new meaning. He said, this is a cup that represents my blood. I'm going to bleed. I'm going to do it for you, because this is what you mean to me. So again, he said to do this to remember him. And Paul would add, every time we do this, this symbol tells that story. So let's do this in remembrance. Let's pray. God, we're grateful for endless second chances. We're grateful that you're in our corner, whether we walked in here today feeling like it or not. You're for us, not against us. And that's something we need to be reminded of on a regular basis. And so, God, I'm grateful that you've given us these tangible symbols to tell this story that we need to remember. So, God, today in our moments of doubt, our moments of struggle and uncertainty, would you help us to remember just how far you went for us, just how concerned you are for us, and that still, even here today in 2024, our lives are in your hands, and we can trust you. Help us to live our lives in remembrance. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.